So, welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So, today I have Jennifer Lancaster from Houston, USA, with me. So, Jennifer is a licensed clinical social worker and supervisor with over 15 years' experience in mental health and care across inpatient, residential, and outpatient settings. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of St. Thomas and a Master of Social Work from George Mason University. And she is a psychedelic-assisted therapy provider and a registered yoga teacher. Lots of qualifications there.
Mhm.
Amazing. So, as the founder of the Houston Healing Collective, Jennifer is committed to helping individuals move beyond symptom management to access deeper healing by addressing unresolved trauma and the root causes of psychological pain. So, Jennifer specializes in the treatment of eating disorders and complex trauma, offering ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, EMDR intensives, yoga, and psychedelic therapy retreats. So her approach emphasizes genuine connection, compassionate presence, and deep curiosity, creating a safe and collaborative space for clients to access their innate capacity for healing and build lives rooted in purpose and authenticity. In addition to her clinical practice, she provides clinical supervision and case consultation focusing on eating disorders, trauma, and psychedelic-assisted therapy. She is also excited to launch a ketamine-assisted therapy training for clinicians in the fall, autumn for the UK listeners of 2026. So, in today's episode, Jennifer is going to talk about how she came to work in this way, having started out using more traditional therapy approaches. You'll hear all about how she works and supports her clients using a range of different treatments, which she has experienced both personally and professionally. Okay, so let's get to it. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's dive in, Jennifer. Like, I guess you sounds like you trained initially as a more sort of traditional psychotherapist. And I think as many people listening will relate to in a way, like with eating disorders and other mental health issues. But I guess we're focusing more on eating disorders today. Sometimes people can feel really stuck, can't they, with sort of talking therapy, behavior therapy, and feel that they have tried many things, they've done the treatment, but they're not still where they want to be in a healed place. So can you tell us a bit more about your journey, so starting off from the more traditional way of working and how you progressed into what you're doing today?
Yes, yeah. So, as a social worker fresh out of school, I went into community health and I worked a lot with children and families and saw a lot of trauma. And just really very early in my career, started to make this connection that trauma seemed to be at the root of so much, no matter what we ended up calling it, from the book and trying to like fit people into these nice diagnoses. And I continued on. I worked in an inpatient psychiatric unit at the Menninger Clinic and also at an eating disorder residential program, and just saw a lot of relapse and recidivism, and felt like these more traditional therapies, which I initially really liked. I was a DBT therapist for a long time. They were helpful for a period of time, and they helped people recognize their behaviors, kind of, you know, see when they were coming on, know their triggers, and have coping skills to manage them. But ultimately, people were feeling really hopeless. Like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm just fighting this uphill battle of being ready, every time these symptoms come on or these triggers happen. And I realized people were asking, like, I feel like these treatment programs are never getting to my trauma. Like, when are we going to talk about my trauma? And I noticed a lot of the treatment programs saying like, oh, we don't want to destabilize anyone. So almost avoiding like really going deep and helping people explore these really significant events in their life that were, I believe, like at the root of everything that was happening. And eventually, that's how I found psychedelic assisted therapy. A colleague of mine told me about ketamine therapy and these amazing results she was having. I took a year-long training through Integrative Psychiatry Institute, and I trained in psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine. Ketamine is the only legal option in Texas right now. So that's the route I took for my clients. And it's really become the majority of my practice now, is providing ketamine therapy along with EMDR and yoga for clients specifically struggling with complex trauma and eating disorders.
Okay, no, thank you for describing that. And I guess I'm thinking so many of our clients are so in their heads, aren't they? And, and it sounds like with a lot of the work you're doing, it really helps people to get into the body much more
Mhm.
and to really deal with the root of that pain rather than being able to access it through kind of rational, logical thinking. Is that right?
Yes, yes, correct. So, insight is helpful and it's definitely the beginning. You need the insight, but I don't think that insight is ultimately going to be what heals a person or makes these longer lasting shifts. And I think that's what can be very frustrating for people. Clients tell me, I understand why I am this way. I understand that I had a very critical mother. I understand that, my abandonment issues are showing up in my relationships, but I just can't interrupt the pattern. And these are just deeply rooted patterns that people can't think their way out of. And psychedelics are really wonderful for that. And we can talk about ketamine in particular, in interrupting those pathways and patterns so that people can make use of therapy in a different way. They can almost observe their life kind of from the outside and have these new perspectives. And sometimes just these connections that happen where they're like, whoa, I didn't think about it that way before, or even though I tried to think about it that way before, I didn't really feel it. Like I didn't really believe it. I couldn't embody it. And I think that psychedelics really help people do that. And part of that is through the neuroplasticity in the brain and the way that it's working on the default mode network, which is where a lot of those rigid patterns and beliefs live. And it really helps, boost these new pathways and kind of quiet that default mode network for a bit so that people can have a new experience.
Sure. So yeah, it sounds like it really kind of like opens the mind up, doesn't it, in a way, to a way
Mm-hmm.
which perhaps when it's been looping in certain ways, it's been so hard to do that before. Um, so I know, Jennifer, as well, you've had your own personal experience of using some of these treatments as well, haven't you? Like, would you be okay just to share a little bit about that before we talk a bit more about the detail of what you do?
Yeah, of course. So, when I first heard about ketamine therapy, and honestly, I had heard more about ketamine therapy, which then kind of opened me up to learning about more of the other psychedelic assisted therapies. I thought, well, I need to try it if I'm going to be helping people through this. It was a part of my training program, but I also did my own series of treatments. And I do have a history of being diagnosed with PTSD, and I had PTSD that really, despite traditional talk therapy with, a wonderful treatment team, just felt very stuck for me. And this course of ketamine therapy really changed everything. I think it changed my baseline. It doesn't mean that there aren't still times that I struggle, but it kind of raised my bottom. And I think helped with my resilience. And then as part of my training program, I went to an intensive weekend that was structured in a group. So it was a large group of us receiving ketamine therapy, sitting for one another, doing our preparation and our integration in a group. And that truly was a life-changing experience for me. I had shifts that I just never even imagined were possible. And those shifts were related to shame, which I think is just one of the, hardest things to work with. And I think we see it a lot with complex trauma and eating disorders. And I can't describe it other than that safe container and that group and the medicine made it possible for me. And it was after that moment, I called my colleagues. I was still in Colorado and I said, oh my gosh, we've been doing it all wrong. We need to be offering group experiences, group healing. I think that's really like where the magic is at. And from that point on, we started offering ketamine-assisted therapy retreats, and we've done many of those. It's my favorite work to do. They're really powerful, and it's people from all different backgrounds, but when they come together, just seeing how much they have in common and supporting one another through healing. So it's really wonderful.
That's so interesting. So I guess as well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of importance about like the group that you were in as well for that weekend. There's a lot of safety and management of the dose and a very safe container, I guess, to enable that work.
Mm. Yes. And I think that's huge in healing, right? Is that if the nervous system doesn't feel safe, it can't heal. And on top of that, a lot of the things that people struggle with, I think, especially related to shame, they stay so hidden. They don't share them with anyone. I think if you can't have someone witness that or someone sit with you through it, it's very hard to heal from it. So, healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship, especially when so much of trauma happens in the context of relationships. And even if you're thinking about individual ketamine therapy, we're very intentional about that. And I would recommend that to anyone who's looking into psychedelic therapy, is that you want to look for providers who understand set and setting. So that's, helping you with the right mindset, helping create a safe environment. So a place that you really feel held and can let go, right? A lot of the psychedelic journey is about letting go of control and being open to wherever it takes you, which is very hard for a lot of people struggling with trauma and eating disorders, because that sense of control makes us feel like we're safe, even though that it's not always the case.
So I'm just wondering as well, what's it like? And I guess this is a very individual experience, isn't it? But when you are
Mhm.
taking ketamine and you're in that kind of group setting, are you sort of very conscious? So how does it feel? Because I guess this is quite
Yeah.
individual, isn't it? But can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And it depends so much on your dose, the route of administration, the person. But I will share, a little bit and try to give people an idea of the experience. Ketamine is actually a dissociative anesthetic with psychedelic properties. And it's very different from more traditional psychedelic medicines. It's different in the way that it works in the brain. So many psychedelics work through serotonin, although a different route than more traditional psychiatric medications. And ketamine works primarily with the glutamate system. It's also much shorter acting, which I think is a great place for people to start. If you think about psilocybin or ayahuasca, you're really committing to many, many hours
Mhm.
of pretty intense journeying and some shadow work. Ketamine lasts for about 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes it's called the most gentle of the psychedelics. It depends on the dose as to how dissociated you feel or how psychedelic the journey feels. But people can feel disconnected from their body for a bit. They can feel as though they're floating, moving, traveling. It can be visual, it can be more emotional. It's almost like a dream, right? And there are different levels of awareness, and people have different kind of preferences. So some of my clients like to stay at lower doses where they feel a little more control over navigating the journey and exploring these different issues that they want to work with. And some people like a really psychedelic journey. They want to be out traveling the universe. And so we personalize it to each person and what they need.
No, sure. Sounds very
Yeah.
interesting. So can you say a bit more, like when clients come to you? I mean, I know you use a range of things. Don't you use this ketamine therapy and use EMDR and use psychedelics and use yoga? So could you give us a bit of an insight into perhaps someone's journey and the different stages that they might go through when they're working with you?
Yeah. So a lot of it starts with assessment and preparation. So some of that is medical. Everyone needs to be cleared by a physician. So I partner with physicians trained in ketamine treatment. They're going to review your medical history, make sure that it's safe for you. You're going to meet with your therapist and make sure that you don't have any challenges that might get in the way. Things like a history of psychosis or being in active mania. Medically, it would be things like uncontrolled high blood pressure, or maybe some serious, heart conditions. And then you'll go through a an intake like you would with a normal therapist to understand your history, understand your stuck points, develop a plan moving forward. What are your goals? And you're going to work with the therapist on setting some intentions. And intentions look like, what would you like to gain from this? So sometimes people's intentions range from, I want to feel safe, or I want to be my authentic self. I want to feel like I don't have to hide. It really ranges depending on the person, and we'll use that intention to help guide your work. Then there are the medicine sessions themselves. Medicine sessions for ketamine are about 2 to 3 hours. People come in, we do something to help them get settled. It might be a meditation. Sometimes people would like to do some gentle movement before the journey. We'll check in on your intentions. And then a therapist sits with you the entire time through the journey. Some people talk openly throughout, and the therapist is tracking that so that they can provide it to the client. Some people really turn inwards. So the whole time they have an eye mask, they have headphones with music, typically without words that they're not familiar with. So it's really allowing more of that subconscious and unconscious material. So the therapist is there. Sometimes people are silent the entire time. And then as I say, land and they're coming out of the medicine, the therapist is there to support them and just sharing whatever came up. And we're really looking for those patterns, those connections, these kind of new perspectives. And then in between the medicine sessions is where integration really happens. And that looks different also for everyone. People who are working to reprocess trauma, it might be EMDR sessions in between medicine. So we're making use of that really beautiful neuroplasticity in the brain. So this period of time in those first several days to a week where the brain is very receptive to change. And that's where we will have the EMDR sessions or even just traditional talk therapy sessions. But people find that they're able to work with the therapy with greater ease. There's less resistance there. And a series of ketamine treatments, we usually recommend at least 6, so 6 to 8. And then people can continue to integrate what came up for quite some time. Just like with any psychedelic journey, you could be integrating that for a year or more. And sometimes when people feel a bit of a slip with their symptoms, maybe fast forward, 3 to 6 months later, they may come back for what we call booster sessions.
Sure. Okay. So they have those kind of initial few sessions, and then they're kind of having like the integrating work in between, which could be EMDR, it could be talking therapy. And like you say, in a way, then it
Mhm.
could continue for weeks or months afterwards, actually, as you're sort of processing everything.
Mhm.
And does it work particularly for specific types of eating disorders, or because I guess in a way, in some ways, the symptoms are a bit irrelevant, aren't they? The deeper trauma and what's at the
Yeah.
root of it is the key thing, isn't it? But can you say a bit more about kind of the different sort of transformations people have experienced going through this journey?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about psychedelics or ketamine, I like to say, think about these conditions that are very rigid and often are the result of trauma. And I think, if you look at many eating disorders, that's what you see. But also, if you think about things like OCD or treatment resistant depression, so it takes people from this very rigid, stuck state to one of greater flexibility, which is really what, as therapists, our goal is, right? Like the psychological flexibility that helps people change. I work a lot with restrictive eating disorders, and I've seen it be very helpful in those cases. I think that it does a lot of different things. One, the work in the brain that's happening to allow for that, for those different ways of thinking and those different perspectives, and for people to step back and say, okay, maybe the way that I've been viewing myself for the last 10, 20 years, maybe there's a new perspective that's more helpful and that I can actually believe, like they can actually connect with it. There's a lot of growing research on psychedelics and eating disorders, as well as ketamine and eating disorders. More research definitely needs to be done. The current research, a lot of the sample sizes are, smaller, or they're case studies, but what they're seeing is that there's a lot of promise with it. So people are able to have just a different view of themselves and a different relationship with themselves and with food.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so promising to hear, isn't it? Because I think particularly with restrictive eating disorders, and when you've had one for a very long time, I guess, the brain does become very rigid, doesn't it? And you get stuck in these kind of cycles. And eating more or putting on weight can just feel like
Mhm.
impossible barriers to overcome. So it sounds like the work that you're doing. I mean, it's so much more than weight and food, isn't it? But I guess, if someone's starting to become more flexible and open and view things in different ways, hopefully that's going to bring about some real shifts in being a little bit more relaxed about body image, or just being able to allow more food or to respond more to one's needs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think being able to relate to that part of themselves. So I do a lot of parts work, being able to relate to that eating disorder part, or maybe this younger part of themselves in a different way, with a lot more understanding and compassion. So they're also not, at war with it. They can
Yeah.
actually get to know that part through the medicine and through the integration work. And I think that makes a real difference for people as well.
Sure. So do you work with people as well who might have only had an eating disorder for a few years, or does it tend to be people that have like tried everything and now they're coming to you after many years?
Yeah, I used to work with a lot of teenagers. So where, the eating disorder was very new and families were reaching out. And as I've continued my work, the people who seem to find me are people who have struggled usually for a very, very long time. And they're at a place where they need something different. They're like, I can't go back to the same old treatment program. I mean, I absolutely, believe that higher levels of care are necessary and helpful for many people, but some of these people have been to higher levels of care 3, 4 times, and they're just like, I just can't go back. Like, I can't go back and go through the same thing and feel like I'm failing again. And that's why they're looking for a different approach. But it's not always the case. We do have people who are earlier on in their eating disorder. Sometimes we have people who find us for trauma and know that they've dealt with trauma for a very long time. And then we actually discover while they're with us that they have these challenges in their relationship with food or their body.
Yeah, no, sure. There's a bit of a mix, but it makes
Mhm.
sense, I guess, doesn't it? Often, like when we've tried many things, that people might approach you and be more open to trying this. And I just
Mhm.
wonder, like, how in the US and, like in terms of eating disorder treatment, in terms of what you're doing, how accepted is it on a sort of widespread scale? Does it still feel that it's a bit sort of outside the box, or do you feel that it's much more becoming much more recognized as a legitimate treatment option?
Mhm. It's very mixed, I think. And when I first started, I was terrified to tell other clinicians that I was doing this. I thought that they would think I had lost my mind. Like, what are you talking about? That's not necessarily what I found. A lot of people were very, very interested in it. They wanted to learn more. I started to give different talks and trainings, and people were fascinated, and they would refer their clients who they felt were really stuck and just needed some intensive work to my practice. And I love, collaborating with those clinicians. There are still some people who are very kind of hesitant or worry about the risk for addiction, or just don't quite, understand it or think this is a, trend. But I think as the research grows and people are becoming much more open to more psychedelics like psilocybin, and now even a lot in the news about ibogaine, that I think people will become more open to it. And I really believe that psychedelic therapy is the way of the future.
Sure. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think I'm sure someone contacted me on the pod to come on the podcast about 3 years ago or something. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, I don't know. It didn't feel quite so comfortable, but I just think there has been a massive shift, hasn't there? I think just in the collective consciousness and a recognition in a way about healing trauma, getting in the body, all of these things. And it feels like I think a lot has shifted, hasn't it, since COVID? Like, would you agree that just I think people are much
Mm-hmm.
more open and there's a lot of healing that's taking place in the world.
Yeah. Yes. No, I think people are really opening their minds. And I see with clients too. I mean, these are clients who come to me and they're like, I have never used a drug. I don't even like to drink. Like, this is so far out of anything. But I think it shows just how people are desperate for something different that really works. And the traditional treatments just haven't given them what they need.
Sure. And are you aware, sort of in terms of like what's available in the UK? Because I guess it's something that I'm not very tapped into, but I'm just thinking about in terms of where else in the world are people really embracing these treatments more?
I know that people are embracing them internationally. There were a lot of international or people outside of the US in my training program. I don't know as much legally as I do kind of in Texas
Yeah.
and the US, but I know it's definitely not just here. And I've met many practitioners, around the world who are using it in practice.
Sure. So if anyone listening is curious and just wanting to dip their toe a bit into this and find out more, like what's the first step really?
Yeah, I would do a lot of research. So, really take your time when you're looking for a provider. Make sure it's a provider who's well trained, and also look for providers who value the therapy. So, there's a difference. And here I can speak to practices, locally. There are infusion clinics, so ketamine infusion clinics, where people can go in, get infusions. They're largely left alone. They're monitored medically, but there's no one guiding them, kind of prepping them, helping them integrate. And then there are ketamine-assisted therapy practices. And I would say, the same goes for anyone who is considering other psychedelic therapies. You really want a practice that prioritizes the therapy. So it's ketamine assisted therapy, where ketamine is the aid and therapy is really what allows you to do the work and change. And make sure that it's a place that's going to do a thorough medical evaluation, that there is some type of physician overseeing your care who you can talk with if you're having any, side effects that come up or issues with your dosing. And just really take your time, and educate yourself so that you make sure you're doing it in the right setting. Because I have had people who have negative experiences, and then it kind of delays them from really getting the help that they need.
Yeah, no, I guess it really emphasizes, doesn't it, the importance of safety and care and intention and really that therapeutic setting because of, yeah, I guess just taking the drug on its own in a sort of as an infusion or
Mm-hmm.
something would be very different, wouldn't it, from when you've got a relationship with a therapist, you've had all that, the physical assessment, the medical assessment, everything. In a way, it's all kind of set you up, hasn't it? You've got that really safe container, the relationship with your therapist, and you kind of know probably a bit more what to expect, don't you? So that I think the safety aspect is so important, isn't it? That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, yes. That's what's going to allow you to really let your guard down and relax and surrender to the process. If you don't feel safe, those protector parts are going to really try to hold on, and sometimes can be very strong and actually resist the medicine. So if you're in a place where you feel supported, you feel safe, it's more likely that you'll be able to really get the full benefits of the journey.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So is there anything I haven't asked you that you think actually that would be really helpful for the listeners to hear about with the work you do?
My goodness, I'm let
Sorry,
me
put you on the
think. You've
spot.
asked some really great questions. We've covered a lot. No, I think, with eating disorder treatment, really looking for care that helps you rebuild that relationship with yourself and your body. We touched on it a little bit, but my whole all of my work is built around this belief that just addressing the thoughts and behaviors is not enough. There's so much that is kind of harmed in the relationship with yourself and your body, whether it's trauma or an eating disorder, and really looking for treatment that helps address that. And those treatments can look very different. There are a lot of great options out there. I love to use yoga, and I think ketamine therapy and EMDR do that very well. But there are lots of options. So just do your research and see if it feels like someone is going to be able to guide you through that process as well.
Okay. So Jennifer, if people want to work with you, they have to live in Texas, do they? Is that right? Or can you support people
They
outside?
Yeah, so for the most part, yes, we do host retreats and we have people travel to Texas for our retreats. We are hoping we've started to look at some places like Costa Rica and Mexico to offer some retreats. If they wanted to do one-on-one work with me, yes. I do psychedelic integration, though, which can be done as coaching, and is not, limited to Texas.
Okay. So if people want to just find out a bit more about the work that you do and they are in Texas or they maybe want to do this coaching, like where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so my website is houstonhealingcollective.co, so not .com. And that's our website. It has a lot of different information there. And, I would welcome people to reach out to me if they have any questions, even not just to work with me, but they have questions about psychedelic assisted therapy in general. I'm happy to answer those.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Well, I shall make sure that information is in the show notes. So just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and really appreciate hearing your insights and wisdom. And I know the listeners will get so much benefit. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.